Hi, everyone. Thank you all for attending this webinar on managing your digital collection. My name is Maggie Downing, and today I'll be discussing some basic concepts and strategies to help you manage your digital collections. So just as a quick introduction, I'm the manager of digital imaging here at the Conservation Center. In this role, I meet with clients to discuss their digitization and printing goals. I write proposals and estimates. I assist with scanning, and I also oversee the quality control operations. And I also work with institutions to conduct digital preservation assessments. And these result in written reports that outline observations and recommendations to improve digital preservation of their collections. I've been at CCAHA for about a year and a half, and before this, I've worked with digital and physical collections at the Museum of Photographic Arts in San Diego and the American Academy for Arts and Letters and the Granger Collection in New York. I look forward to breaking down some of these key concepts in digital preservation over this next hour. In this webinar, I'll discuss some of the main challenges we face in managing digital collections, some key terms that you'll encounter when you deal with digital collections and digital preservation, the characteristics we're going to look for in our digital records, some basic activities to conduct in managing our digital collections, and how to conduct a basic self-assessment of your institution using the National Digital Stewardship Alliance's levels of digital preservation. So the focus of this webinar will be on first steps and things to consider when establishing a digital collection and digital preservation program. There's definitely a lot to learn about in this field, and I'll end with some resources for continuing education. So although a lot of the key concepts for caring for physical collections are transferable to digital collections care, there are several unique challenges that digital materials pose. One is that they are dependent on technology. And this means that we need machines and codes to read and interpret the information in digital records. And those machines and codes are constantly changing. Unlike paper records, digital records cannot survive without constant attention. For example, most of us will recognize what a floppy disk looks like, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to find a reader for one. Similarly, file formats and operating systems will become outdated. For example, a hard drive formatted on a Mac from 2006 may not be readable on Windows 10. And that's an actual example of something I just encountered here at the center. While I was updating our inventory, I found a very old hard drive, one of those big ones that you will plug into a wall, and it just said backup. That was the only labeling on it. And this was apparently formatted on a Mac, so we had to find an old Mac to read it. So helpful labeling will also go a long way. And then we'll also talk about how active file management can help mitigate this risk of the dependence on technology. Another challenge is just the volume of digital records and files that are in our collections. You may find that it seems like you're always running out of disk space or server space when you start a digital collection. Large-scale digitization projects of archival collections, while they definitely have a lot of benefits, digital storage needs to grow as we continue to grow our digital collections. In addition to that, the cameras and scanners that we use to create these images keeps improving, which is great, but it's also resulting in file sizes that are becoming bigger and bigger. So in addition to digitized materials, there's also just a lot more information that is born digital. So written correspondence can be replaced by emails. Project documents are created and saved as Word or Excel files. And fine art photography and film, in many cases, is being created digitally. So here we'll talk a little bit more about how file inventory and planning can help you project your storage needs for the future. Digital files are also susceptible to human error or attack. Depending on how your files are stored, it can be easy to accidentally delete something or misplace, rename, or move a file to where it doesn't belong. This is obviously harder, though it's not impossible, to do most of these things with physical records. Digital records are also vulnerable to hacking, malicious data corruption, deletion, or leak. So we'll talk about some methods for storing your digital files in a way that helps reduce this challenge. And lastly, it can feel overwhelming. This is a really big issue in managing collections. The intangibility of digital records can be kind of a conceptual challenge, and it can be difficult to communicate and advocate for the needs of managing digital records to upper administration. Digital preservation is also a relatively new field of study, and lots of archivists find themselves needing to care for digital materials without necessarily having covered that in their training. And really, it can seem like there is too much to learn to care for digital records, but I hope I can share with you some first steps in gaining control of unwieldy digital collections. And a lot of these steps will mirror the goals in preserving your physical collection, so will hopefully sound familiar. So before we dive into these first steps I've been discussing, I want to briefly discuss some key vocabulary that I'll be using and that you'll continue to encounter as you learn more about digital collection management. I'll talk about archives and digital records, digital preservation, the terms digitized versus born digital, file format, media, metadata, and the terms fixity and checksums. So I first want to start with the Society of American Archivists' definition of an archive, because this can help us shape how we think about digital collections. So they define an archive as consisting of materials created or received by a person, family, or organization, public or private, in the conduct of their affairs that are preserved because of the enduring value contained in the information they contain or as evidence of the functions and responsibilities of their creator. And SAA defines a digital record as data or information that has been captured and fixed for storage and manipulation in an automated system, and that requires the use of the system to render it intelligible by a person. So a digital record is created by a machine, and it requires a machine to make it intelligible. And a digital record is selected for an archive or collection because it is evidence or it has otherwise enduring value. Digital preservation combines policies, strategies, and actions to ensure access to reformatted and born digital content, regardless of the challenges of media failure and technological change. The goal of digital preservation is the accurate rendering of authenticated content over time. Digital preservation policies can be department or institution-wide, and we'll discuss some strategies and actions later in this presentation. But the goal of digital preservation, in short, is to ensure that our information does not become corrupted over time. Next, I want to differentiate between the terms digitized and born digital. Digitized records are born analog. So this is material that would be scanned or photographed from a physical format, such as a negative, document, or a book. And typically, these will result in a TIFF, a JPEG, or a PDF format. Digitized is also referred to as reformatted, so you may see that and some other literature. Born digital is material created with software, such as Word documents, InDesign layouts, databases, email, websites, and the like. File formats are conventions for encoding data into human readable form. So like the formats that I mentioned in the previous slide, these can include TIFF, JPEG, PDF, and many more formats. File formats can be proprietary or open source, and I'll talk a little bit more about how to select a preservation file format later on. Media is where your files are stored. This could be a hard drive, which is disk space on a computer, a server, which is a computer system used as a repository of data shared by a network. So if we work in an office setting, many of us may work with a local server network where files are stored in a directory and then they can be shared across a department or institution. The cloud basically just means storing content on the internet rather than on a local server or hard drive. And a digital repository is similar in theory to library stacks. So these are systems in which digital records are organized and searchable and have a specific persistent location so that managers maintain intellectual control and researchers can find what they're looking for. And last, I have listed portable or removable media, and this includes things like CDs, DVDs, floppy disks, portable hard drives, and thumb drives. The next thing I want to discuss is metadata. And we'll see this a lot in digital preservation and digital collections management. Metadata is information that describes, explains, locates, or makes it easier to retrieve, use, or manage an information resource. So that's kind of a lot, so I wanted to try and break this down a little bit further. Metadata is information that you record about an object or record. And a lot of metadata is information you may already be recording for physical materials, such as MARC records and finding aids. Descriptive metadata, such as Dublin Core, includes fields like the title, subject, creator, description, date, and the like. And we also have administrative metadata, which includes copyright and access restrictions. But there is some metadata that is specifically used just for digital material. And this includes technical metadata, which includes the scanner and the camera that's used to create the file, the date it was created, the pixel dimensions. And this is typically embedded automatically at the time the file is created. There's also structural metadata, which records how a file relates to other files, such as whether a file is a page from a book and what order that page exists. There's also preservation metadata, which include checksums, which I'll discuss next, a history of data corruption or recovery, information on when files were transferred, when we performed virus scans, and the like. And last, I wanted to discuss fixity and checksums. This topic is a little bit more technical for the scope of this webinar, but I do want to mention it because this will come up as you continue to learn more about digital collection management and digital preservation. So basically, a fixity check is the assurance that a digital file has remained unchanged over time or in transfer. And this is done by creating a checksum, which is like a digital fingerprint. And a checksum is a stream of letters and numbers that change if the bit stream changes. And this is generally an automated process using a software tool rather than something that's done by hand. So it may sound a little bit complicated, but it's actually easier than it seems. I've included a link here to the Digital Preservation Coalition Handbooks section on fixity and checksums. And this discusses some of the tools that are available for this. I also wanted to mention that if you work at an institution that has an IT team, they may already be incorporating the generation of checksums and fixity checks into their general backup procedure, or they may be able to help you set up a workflow for this. So at this point, I just wanted to pause and see if there were any questions about our goals for this webinar and some of these key terms I discussed. And I'll just pause for a few seconds here. All right, well, I will move on to talking about the characteristics that we look for in a digital record. So I need to credit the Society of American Archivists again for this outline and these definitions. So we want our digital records to have these characteristics. So authenticity, reliability, integrity, and usability. And digital preservation is maintaining all of these traits over time. So I'll go through and talk a little bit more about each of these characteristics in the next couple of slides. So the first one is authenticity. So can we prove that the digital record is what it attests to be? So authenticity can be established by adding metadata. And this includes the administrative metadata, technical metadata, descriptive metadata, and preservation metadata that we discussed earlier. The next is reliability. Is the digital record complete and accurate? Reliability can be established through adding structural metadata. So we can ask ourselves, is the digital record part of a larger group? And does it represent one page in a group of letters? And what order do those files, should those files be organized? The next is integrity. And here we want to ask if the digital record is complete and unaltered over time or in transit. And integrity of a digital record can be established by computing a checksum, using a system that assigns unique ID to all records, avoiding duplication in file names and folder names, and storing final files as read-only, meaning they can't be altered by users. And last is usability. Is the digital record accessible? Usability can be established by using a consistent file and folder naming scheme, creating indexes and inventories of the digital records, employing a system for search and retrieval. That's not just full text search in a search box. And this you could use a collection management software, digital asset management system, or even just an Excel spreadsheet. So I'll pause just briefly for questions again before I go into some of these activities that we'll take to preserve our digital records. Okay, well, we'll pause again for questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll just keep plugging along. So this is kind of, now that we have an understanding of the goals of digital preservation and some of the key terms, I now want to discuss some of the practical steps to take in preserving digital collections. So I'll discuss what each step should achieve, as well as some tools, strategies, and guiding documents that can help along the way. These activities are not meant to be discrete step-by-step actions. You'll see that they overlap with each other. So for example, you don't have to have fully identified every single digital record or created a formal selection policy for your digital materials before you begin efforts to store and maintain them over time. But a general workflow would be first to identify digital content that you have, select a content that warrants preservation, process the selected content by arranging, describing, and preparing it for storage, storing the selected content, and maintaining the content over the long term through monitoring, migration, and data recovery. This breakdown of actions is adapted from the Library of Congress's Digital Preservation Outreach and Education, and also Digital Power, which stands for Preserving Digital Objects with Restricted Resources. So the first step that I mentioned is identify. And the goal here is to take stock of the digital materials that are currently in your care. This can include digitized files that you scanned from physical materials, born digital artworks, and institutional records. This is kind of a social step. So you want to talk with anyone who interacts with these materials, including staff, interns, volunteers, supervisors, and IT as needed. You don't need any specialized tools really to begin this process, and you can use a simple Excel document or other database tool. And at the end, you can create a working digital asset register. So a digital asset register, the things you want to consider recording about your digital records is the name of the collection or the content. Sorry, I'll just go back a little bit, explain what this digital asset register will help along the way. This is a guiding document, and it'll help planning next steps, and it will also help you project storage needs moving forward. This will inform policies and procedures that you create along the way in managing your digital collections. So it's important to create this inventory of digital records to ensure that the scope is fully accounted for and documented. And again, this can be in the form of an Excel spreadsheet. So these are the fields you want to consider recording information for is the name of your collection or content, the person or department that's responsible for maintaining that collection, the size of the collection, so that meaning how much storage space does it take up, the location of the files, are they all on your server, or do you have some things that are saved on computer hard drives or external media? Are there any materials kept and managed by partner institutions? If so, you want to make a note of their deposit agreements and any digital preservation policies that they may have. You want to make a note of your backup policy for the collection or the content, the file formats that are maintained, any retention policies that you have a record of. So this could include information that's in a collection management policy for accessioned materials, records retention policies for institutional archives. And if you have materials that have no retention schedules, you can make a note of that as well. You want to consider the ownership rights and any data protection issues. So if you know who owns the copyright, you should record this. And if that's unknown, that's also something to make a note of. And consider if there's any sensitive or restricted information. So if you manage institutional records, this could include personally identifiable information or financial information. Consider the associated risks and impact. Does the digital content depend on any specific hardware or software? And also consider the estimated value of the content. So how easy would it be to retrieve, and how difficult would it be to reproduce? So I know this is a lot of information to consider at the beginning of the process. And I would recommend thinking broadly about the scope of your collections and then moving on to think more granularly about discrete series. And also, as you begin working on this, it's unlikely that you're going to have all this information about your records from the very beginning, and that's fine. But you want to record what you do know and fill in the rest as you continue to manage and learn more about your collections. So once we have a beginning inventory to work from, the next step would be to select. So once we know that what we have, we can make more informed decisions about what we are going to protect. So the goal here is to identify information that is deemed to require long-term preservation. And this does not necessarily mean preserve forever, though it can, such as digital records that are part of an institution's art collection. But it can also include records such as institutional files that you don't have to keep forever, but you do have to keep them long enough to be concerned with changes in user, technology, or accessibility. This is another low-tech activity, and you can consult with everyone who uses the digital assets and consult the information you gathered for the digital asset register. Your tools can be your mission statement and your guiding documents and staff knowledge. And the resulting documentation will be a digital preservation selection policy for your institution or your department. These policies can be incorporated into existing documents, such as a collection development policy, and the selection policy will help inform your digitization procedures and donor agreements for digital materials. So your selection criteria should support your mission. Are there collecting areas stated in your mission? If so, you definitely want to make sure that these materials are identified. Your selection criteria should reflect criteria for physical materials. So consider whether you have a collection development policy or records retention policy. And do you have restrictions on collecting or preserving objects that are in poor condition? Your selection criteria should inform the creation of new digital content through digitization and born digital content. So here you'll consider what you will likely collect in the future. What do you want more of in the collection? And what do you want to consider discouraging from entering your collection? Then you'll prioritize file formats that are widely adopted and platform independent. And it's okay if valuable format or valuable records in your collection aren't in a preferred format, but you just need to find out if they can be migrated, and if not, incorporate all of those restrictions into your workflows and procedures. So just to clarify a little bit more about these considerations for file formats, you want to prioritize formats that are widely adopted. So the idea is that file types that lots of people use are more likely to stick around and not become obsolete. More specialized formats and file types are at a higher risk. Your file format should ideally be platform independent, meaning it can be opened in different programs. This does not necessarily mean that it is completely free and open source, however. For example, a PDF is a file format that's created and managed by Adobe, but there are lots of programs that can open PDFs and are not Adobe Reader or Acrobat. I'm including 2 links here for more information on preservation file formats. The Smithsonian document in particular has a helpful table to reference with recommended formats that they give for a variety of types of data, including text, images, video, audio, websites, and data sets, to name just a couple. All right, so now that we have identified the digital records that are in our care and selected what we need to preserve long-term, the next step will be to process the records. And this step actually covers a lot of the actions that will be taken on digital records. Oh, I do have a question here. I'll just read this. Regarding selection, isn't this step the same as archival appraisal? Once I select items to be kept in my repository, then by definition, are they kept for the long term? And I would say yes. So if you're considering materials that are already in your repository, then I would say that the selection process or a selection step is complete. So this will be to evaluate materials before they come into a digital repository. And this is something, if you work at an institution where you have digital records, but you don't have already established a digital repository, then this will be an important step. But if you're already maintaining a digital repository, then the selection process is occurring as you're appraising the records for the repository. I hope that is clear. So I'll move on, and then we can chat a little bit more at the end. So the goal of processing the records is to establish the characteristics of digital records that we discussed earlier, being authenticity, reliability, integrity, and usability. And a lot of the actions that we take while processing digital records are similar to those undertaken with physical records. However, while physical materials in archives can often be processed after they are accessioned, digital files require processing to begin before the accession. You want to understand the properties of the files coming into the collection to determine if they can be properly managed long-term. Tool selection here will vary depending on the scope of your collection, staff expertise, and budget. There are a lot of resources on tool selection, and I've included a couple of links here. If you're at the point where you're interested in starting to implement some of these tools, I recommend reviewing this information more in depth. Here are a couple of tools that you may encounter as you continue to work with your digital collections. One is called Bit Curator. And this allows you to view files and their characteristics without opening them or changing them. And Archivematica, which combines several tools used in digital preservation. This can generate a checksum, extract technical metadata, add rights information, among lots of other tasks related to digital preservation. The resulting documentation from the processing step here can include documents such as processing procedures, metadata guidelines, a data dictionary, donor agreements, and access policies. So the basic steps of processing digital records include gathering contextual information, performing a conservation assessment, identifying access restrictions, arranging the records, describing the records, and creating access tools. Some of the information that we'll gather as we process digital records is related again to the information collected in the identify step, where we create a digital asset register. And this section will go in more in depth, but I just want to reiterate that these steps do overlap and relate to one another. So again, I'll go into each of these steps a little bit more in depth in the next couple of slides. So first we'll want to gather contextual information to the extent possible. So here we want to ask how the materials were created and why, how they were previously managed, what their current context is, and what hardware and software dependencies there are. Then we'll want to perform a conservation assessment. And for digital records, this includes a virus scan, identifying and validating file formats, generating a checksum, and identifying any preservation issues, such as do they contain file formats that are outdated, or are the records on media that's obsolete? Next, you want to identify access restrictions. So we can identify personally identifiable information, identify any copyright issues if possible, identify any embargo restrictions that may have come from the donor, and identify culturally sensitive information. And this is something to consider, especially for any religious or tribal collections. Then you'll want to arrange the materials intellectually. So first you can try to determine if the materials coming into your collection have an original order. And if you decide to change that, be sure to keep a record of their original order. Then you'll identify relationships between the groups of materials and rearrange files into series that make sense for your collection. Next, you'll want to describe your records using metadata, including the descriptive, administrative, structural, and preservation metadata. And this does not need to be an item level description. You can describe your collections in series or collections of files. Metadata can be associated with your files in a variety of ways. It can be embedded within the file itself using a variety of tools such as Adobe Bridge or EXIF tool. But it doesn't have to be embedded into the file, though this is common. You can simply record this information into an Excel or other database, as long as the information corresponds with a file name or folder name, and you keep the database with the files it corresponds to. And metadata can also be input through a variety of content or data management systems you may already have in place, such as TMS, PastPerfect, Embark, or Content DM. And last, you'll want to create access tools, such as finding aids, online catalogs, and online exhibits. Okay. So the next step is to set up secure storage for your files. So if you do work at an institution with an IT team, you may want to consult them at this point to establish workflows for this step. It's possible that these activities are already being conducted or can be adapted to suit your digital preservation needs. The goal here is to establish or maintain authenticity and integrity of your digital records over time. Tools will include local servers, cloud storage services such as Amazon Web Services, digital preservation systems such as MetaArchive or DuraCloud, and digital repositories. And this will result in a storage and backup procedure for your digital files. So if possible, you want to protect the authenticity of your digital records before storing them long-term by performing a fixity check of the checksums. If the digital records don't have checksums, then you can generate them at this point. But if you're not able to perform a fixity check, that's okay. I only want to mention it as something to keep in mind and work toward. But even if you don't do this step, you can still continue with these other digital preservation activities where you can. One basic way to store and protect your data is to store in a read-only directory on your server and to practice a 3-2-1 backup procedure. So this means that you have 3 copies of your data on 2 media types with at least 1 copy maintained offsite. So for example, you can have 1 copy of your records on your local server that is backed up regularly to a backup server, and then have a 3rd backup in cloud storage or on a tape backup drive. But even better, you can have your backup server in a different building than your main server. Media types, again, include your network servers, cloud storage, digital repositories, and a digital repository will accept the responsibility for long-term preservation on behalf of the depositor. Often universities may have a university-wide digital repository that you can consider collaborating with. And removable media, including hard drives and tape drives. But it's important to stress here that removable media should be considered temporary media. With the exception of tape backups, we generally do not recommend removable media, such as portable hard drives, CDs, or thumb drives for long-term preservation storage. And lastly, we want to manage our digital records long-term. So the goal here is to ensure ongoing access to the digital records over time. And to do this, we'll monitor our files and migrate them as needed. And we'll also monitor the field of digital preservation. So the tools here will be, one example is the Fixity tool for conducting the Fixity checks on our checksums. And this can also be incorporated into IT backup workflows, and they may have other tools to help with this as well. And then rather than a resulting document, I've listed a relevant document here. So the actions that you undertake as you manage your digital files over a long period of time should all be guided by a digital preservation policy adopted by the institution or department. So to manage your digital collections long-term, you want to monitor your files and continue to perform fixity checks periodically. You'll want to perform preservation audits. So these are sporadic audits just to ensure that the processing actions that we discussed are meeting stated obligations and attest to the accuracy and availability of your digital content. You need to maintain your technical infrastructure, so performing maintenance on the hardware and software, on the facilities, supplies, and technical components used for the storage and access as needed. And you want to migrate files. So migration is the conversion of data to the latest file formats or relocation to new storage media as required. Keeping track and monitoring your backup procedures. And we also want to monitor the digital preservation field. So I've listed a lot of resources here, and I'll kind of go through them and explain what these are. So the Digital Preservation Coalition publishes some very great resources, including the Digital Preservation Handbook that I referenced once or twice in this presentation. And they also publish a digitally endangered species list every year where they evaluate the risks of different types of files and file formats. The American Library Association has a listserv that's dedicated to digital preservation, and you can subscribe to this link here. The Sustainable Heritage Network offers a lot of online tutorials related to digitization and digital preservation. DHPSNY and CCAHA offer webinars on a wide variety of topics. They're certainly not all related to digital preservation, but definitely keep an eye out to our calendars there. Lyrasis offers free and paid webinars related to digital preservation. Some of the tools that I mentioned here will have free tutorials available through their classes. A little bit more in depth is the Society of American Archivists. They offer a digital archive specialist certificate through a series of online and in-person education. And then POWER, which I also mentioned earlier, preserving objects with restricted resources. They have some great links to webinars and resources. And this is an initiative of the Northern Illinois University. Okay. So now that we've reviewed the challenges in digital preservation and some actions we can take to mitigate some of these challenges at managing our collections, I wanted to briefly talk about a tool for self-assessment. The National Digital Stewardship Alliance has published a matrix called the Levels of Digital Preservation. And this is a tiered set of recommendations on how to build or enhance digital preservation activities. This references and summarizes all of the things we've talked about over this past 45 minutes. And it's a lightweight tool for self-assessment, and it helps us to encourage ways to think about our digital preservation goals. The levels cover categories that include storage, integrity, control, metadata, and content. So a good goal moving forward from this webinar would be to aim for level 1 in each of these categories. So for example, putting your content into stable storage, creating 2 copies of your data in separate locations, having a document that identifies the storage media where your content is stored, verify or generate integrity information through the generation of checksums, and checking your content for viruses, as well as determining who can be authorized to read, write, move, or delete your content, create an inventory of your content, and document your digital file formats. I like these levels of digital preservation. It's just another way of thinking about where you are and what you want to achieve in the future. So just to wrap up, we covered some of the challenges that we face in caring for digital collections and some steps to take to protect our collections. But because of these challenges, it is important to communicate throughout your institution that caring for digital records is much more hands-on than simply backing up your data. It's an active and ongoing process and requires support over time. Active management of digital collections will greatly reduce the threat of the challenges that we've discussed to the meaning of your content. Lastly, the field of digital preservation is always changing. As we work toward our goals, it's helpful to periodically assess where we are and what we might take as next steps. So we do have about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to take any questions that you may have about what we covered here. So there's one question: is cloud storage a long-term solution? And that would depend on the cloud storage option. It would definitely be a good backup to have cloud storage through something like Amazon Web Services or Amazon Glacier. And they do offer large amounts of data backup. And yes, so there are definitely secure options in cloud storage. Are copies of your presentation available? Yes, we will be sending out a PDF of the presentation by the end of the week. And there will also be a recording available. All right, great. Seeing lots of questions come in. Okay, here we go. Sorry, I'm just scrolling through these here. Do you have a sample Excel digital asset register or digital preservation selection policy, or are there links that you have provided? I can put together, I don't have links to these off the top of my head, but I can put together a resources document that includes all of the links in this presentation and can also link you to a sample digital preservation selection policy. Do you have any recommendations for software programs that incorporate both physical asset management and management of their digital surrogates? We use Past Perfect for our physical collections, but I doubt it's robust enough to keep track of our digitized material. That's a great question. There's a lot of options out there for managing like content management systems and then more robust softwares. So I think what I'll do, I don't have a recommendation off the top of my head, but I can include some links to a variety of softwares to look into. And it really will depend on the size of your institution, the budget, and the staff support. So I hope I'll be able to send a little bit more helpful information in the resources document. The next question is, does a repository need to maintain the physical records once they have digitized them? And this depends on the archive. It's possible that you are not responsible for the physical records after they have been digitized, but I would think that rare materials, you definitely do want to keep the physical records. But something like office correspondence, maybe that's not as critical to keep the hard copy. If they have been digitized and you have a digital preservation policy where you have a backup policy, 3 copies of your data in 2 locations, on 2 media with one in a separate type of media. For a small local historical society, how do you choose a content management system? Is it helpful to use one used by a state library or a historical association? I would recommend talking with people at the state library and historical association and see how they like using the content management systems. But this is a question that we get a lot, and it's unfortunately not a quick answer just because there are so many factors to consider. But again, I'll try to link to some more information on that. Is there a resolution that's considered minimal for preservation? We do low resolution scanning for research requests and found that we have a lot of digitized materials, but are these adequate? Generally for digitization, I look to the Federal Agency Digitization Guidelines Initiative, or that's FADGI is the acronym. And they have minimum resolution recommendations for a variety of materials. So this will vary depending on whether it's a 35mm slide or a 8x10 letter or a fine art photograph. And that I will also link to that too. That's a great resource. How do you find the finances to start and maintain a collection for smaller institutions? That's a very good question too. I would recommend looking at local and state grant opportunities. Looking for any fundraising opportunities. This may be covered in another webinar, fundraising for small collections. So keep an eye out for those new topics coming up in the DHPSNY webinars. Would family genealogy require permission before digitizing? possibly, depending on the personal information that's involved in the collection. Going back to a certain date, I think it would be in the public domain, the information, but it definitely wouldn't hurt to reach out to the families involved. And certainly you can email me with more questions as they come up. I have my email address written right here. And file formats, a question on file formats, is PDFA preferred? PDFA is a preferred file format for a lot of types of material, including typed documents and general collections. But for fine art and rare collections, generally generally the guidelines recommend TIFF files. But that will be, you'll have more of a breakdown of that in the federal agency digitization guidelines that I will include in the handout. Does the Fixity checksum procedure provide remedial measures to fix files should problems occur with the files? So from my understanding, a Fixity check will just tell you if there's been some level of corruption, but it won't tell you where that file is corrupted and how to fix it. So the best action to take if you see that your file has changed is to replace it with a backup copy. So that's where our backup copies generally come in handy. Here's a question. Are there initiatives for helping smaller institutions make their archives available on larger state or public sites? And yes, for New York, there's the New York Heritage Digital Collections. And I believe this is also part of DPLA, the Digital Public Library of America. Maybe, I might be wrong on that. But there are local, trying to think of how to say this. I'm looking at the site right now on my colleague's computer. But if you go to newyorkheritage.org, there's a link just at the top for contributors, and you can find more information on how to join. Perfect. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Christy. All right, I think I got most of these questions in the chat box. If I scrolled past yours, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But you can please feel free to reach out to me over email. And I do hope to give more information on these questions where I wasn't able to give like a very straight answer to. And I will put together a document with all the links that I mentioned in the presentation, as well as some extra ones to kind of address some of these questions. So that kind of takes us to the end of the hour. Thank you all. It was a pleasure.